And we're live. Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to She Built It, Boss Lady Chronicles. I am Sharita Gaskins-Tillett. I am your host. And this is the show where we feature the extraordinary stories of women who are owning their power to transform their lives and usually by extension, the lives of others. And so I am super excited about tonight's guest. I'm just going to allow a couple minutes for people to log on. Just a reminder, if you are watching us live, please say hi in the comments. I put your questions in the comments. Our guest is happy to answer questions. If you're watching the replay, hashtag replay and still put your questions in the comments because I will forward them and get you the answers that you are looking for. And then just as a reminder, registration is still open for a weekend for me, happening October 2nd through the 5th in Grand Cayman. I would love to see you there. We have extended the early bird pricing through the end of June. So, get your spot, secure your place today. Alrighty. So I'm going to introduce our guest. So I have joining me tonight Dr. April Ulmer. Dr. April is a board certified pediatric gastroenterologist, national speaker, and media entrepreneur with over 2 decades of experience in clinical care, public health advocacy, and community engagement. She is the founder of Mississippi's only independent pediatric GI practice and the first private pediatric gastroenterologist in the state. A trusted voice in both medicine and media, blending clinical expertise with cultural relevance to drive health equity. She is also the creator and host of the Project Further podcast and The Tummy Doctor, with a platform focused on demystifying health for underserved audiences. Dr. April is a recognized leader, mentor, and advocate with deep roots in service through Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the Links Incorporated, and Jack and Jill of America Incorporated. Welcome, Dr. April.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's so good to see you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for coming on. I'm happy to have you with us tonight. So I usually start by asking you to kind of lead me on your professional journey because you have accomplished a lot in terms of your gastroenterology practice in particular. So were you always interested in medicine? How did you end up in gastro, pediatric gastro? Because that's real subspecialized. And
Right.
it seems like you're the only one of your kind. So,
Right.
so how did we get here?
Yeah. So, I'm born and raised in Mississippi. So I've been interested in medicine since I think I was probably 6 years old. And I think that just comes from my desire to serve. That's just sort of who I've always been. And I had the opportunity to attend medical school in Mississippi before I left the state. And I was out of state for probably about 10 years training up the East Coast. I really fell in love with GI once I was in medical school, and kids are just, a no-brainer. They're so fun. And I just really felt like with gastroenterology in general, it brought a lot of medicines to the procedural realm. And so that's what I fell in love with. And like I said, I love dealing with kids. And that's sort of what led me on my journey to pursue a career in pediatric gastroenterology. After I completed training in New York, definitely wanted to come back to the state. That was always my plan, my hope. So, with my relatively new husband in tow, we came back to the state and we've been here ever since. So it's been a journey, but definitely, a labor of love for sure.
Okay, so now you founded a practice though, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
I
so
did.
there are lots of people who are gastroenterologists, but I think you're only the second one I know who actually has a private practice.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that journey like? I mean, do you have entrepreneurs in your family?
You
Yeah.
know, my dad always had an entrepreneurial spirit, but a different generation didn't have all the tools that we have now, like the internet and access to all the things that we have, especially, coming from small town Mississippi. So just to give you a little bit of backstory about how and why I started my practice. After coming back to the state, I joined a relatively large adult gastroenterology group. I was brand new, fresh out of fellowship, having to figure it all out hard and fast. And so I did that for a while. And then just realized that, and this is something that we'll also touch on later, as a woman in medicine, I mean, this, right? There are certain spaces that just aren't dominated by women and kind of aren't really made for you, right?
Right.
And
Oh
so,
yeah.
yeah. And so after experiencing that and, being one of the most productive pediatric GIs in the country at that point, creating something where there was nothing for this large GI group. I felt like if I just kept my nose to the grind and I just worked harder and I did more, eventually they would see my worth. Eventually there would be sort of a sense of equity when it came to my voice, valuing my voice and my insight, my input. And I just sort of felt like that didn't happen, and that became a little bit of a recurrent story even after I moved here to the coast. And I always laugh and I say, I'm a doctor by trade, but I'm actually a builder by nature, right?
Yeah.
And so after a while I said, you know what? If there is something that needs to be accomplished, or needs to exist and it doesn't exist, then sometimes you have to build it. And so that's ultimately what led me to start my own practice. And when I started it, I had the idea of creating an environment where the best care could be given for children, but also there would be a seat at the table for people like me, mothers, young mothers, women, where they could be represented, but also valued and treated with value. And so that's what I did. And so now it's been almost 10 years. I have 2 locations. My staff and I are very much like family. And that was really the goal. And I think that is really the lesson, right? Is just sort of understanding that, I think it's important to ask for a seat at a table in the room where you want to be. But if they won't give you a seat, then first of all, you bring your chair. And then if they still say there's no room for you, then you build the room. And so essentially that's what I did. And that's why.
Yeah. So I absolutely love this. I love everything about this. And I'm always, so the reason I do this show is because I like to kind of delve into the minds of women like you, women who create something out of nothing. Because, there's so many of us women in medicine, women in any other profession probably too, who find ourselves in places where our voices are not heard, where we're not respected. But instead of creating something different, we just stay there, right? You stay there, you complain, you say, I'm stuck. They won't do this for me. They won't do that for me. So who were your mentors? Like, what made you, is that just the way you're made? What made you say, you know what, I'm going to build my own thing?
Yeah. I credit my parents, of course. My mother is a spitfire. Anyone who knows her will say the same. But I think that's really where it came from, is that belief in self, and that desire to create. I'm a huge empath, right? And so one of the biggest things also that led me to create my practice was I felt like, because pediatric gastroenterology is so different from adult GI, I wasn't necessarily allowed to give the care and attention to the kids that they deserved, and so that was another thing, being able to affect change and create an environment where the best care could be given. But like I said, not any true entrepreneurs in my family, but just a desire to and the courage to be adventurous, right? My parents have always instilled that in us, just to be adventurous. And I think another thing, and I think it's also sort of one of those things that is kind of misrepresented. You don't have to have everything in line before you before you just step out there. One of the biggest things that I relate to other women that I talk to who are thinking about stepping out on their own or creating something is start messy, and the clarity and the refinement will come as you build, and sometimes that means you have to rethink. Sometimes it means you have to restructure. Sometimes it means you have to completely pivot or scrap your initial plans. But the most important thing is to start. And so that's what I did. I had experience under my belt. I knew I had a strong desire. It doesn't mean that I wasn't afraid. I don't think that, stepping out there means that you can't be afraid. It's just that your desire to create something, your drive has to outweigh your fear. And then once you're in it, then you'll see your path, and so I think that that's important for people to know as well. You don't have to know everything about what you're doing. You just have to have that desire, a willingness to learn and listen. And, to your point, as far as mentors, seek out advice, seek out help, and I have done that in lots of different ways, in lots of realms, not just medicine. So.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us about one of your mentor kind of experiences? How did you encounter? Because a lot of people want mentors, but they don't know how to get a mentor.
Right.
So what did you do to find a mentor?
Yeah. So with my situation with mentors, lots of times when people think about mentors, they think about finding someone in your field who has done exactly what you've done. Pediatric gastroenterology, there are very few of us. There aren't very many.
Right.
And as you alluded to, even fewer that have started their own practice. And pediatric GI really is relatively different from adult GI. There are lots of different considerations that you have to take into account. So it wasn't that I had a physician mentor who had done what I'd done.
Mm-hmm.
What I found was people to surround myself with that could bolster me and guide me in the ways that I needed to be guided. You know, I'm really big on alignment. I'm really big on clarity. I'm really big on divine mission. And so over the course of my life, being able to encounter people that bring different aspects to me to help strengthen me and guide me in terms of recognizing who I am and what I require in order to live my mission. And so, you know, friends that I've encountered along the way, you know, there's a good friend of mine now that has, you know, sort of acquainted me with practices of journaling and also meditation, you know, things like that. Those are what I consider my mentors, people that can help you to become your best self. And if you need to pick up the phone and call them and ask their opinion about something, then they're there. But as far as a professional mentor, I can't say that I really had one. You know, I mean, I just kind of was in the trenches and I figured it out as I went. But I do think it's important for people to understand that the first step is to do the shadow work, figure out who you are, and figure out what it is that aligns with who you are. Okay, clarity is important. And then, you know, step out there and do take the steps to achieve whatever it is that you hope to achieve based on that alignment with who you are.
So how did you learn all this though? Because you know, you think about it, and this is some of the work that I do with the retreats and that I do with Boss Lady Dream Builders. But you know, there are so many women in particular, because that's who I work with. That's what I know. OBGYN. I don't know anything about men really.
Right.
I know women. So I know, you know, there are a lot of women who want a different kind of life, but they don't even know to seek that clarity, you know, to get in touch with themselves and to give themselves permission to ask those questions, like what is it that I really want?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious how you know, who taught you that? Where did you learn that?
Mm-hmm. I think that I learned it through the struggles that I've gone through over the years. You know, I'm at the stage where what people think matters less to me.
Mm-hmm.
And what's most important is, what do I think? What do I think? What is my mission? What is it that is going to fulfill me? I think that one of the problems is people get caught up chasing happiness,
Mm-hmm.
right? And happiness can be fleeting. You know,
Yeah,
you can start out your day and you're having a great day and you're happy, and then something happens and suddenly you're unhappy, right? Not only that, you know, happiness is subjective, right? And so one thing that I began to do is I started to chase fulfillment, right? And I think that is just something sometimes that comes with time. You know, after going through things, after recognizing mistakes that you've made, you know, owning that and recognizing how you would have done things differently. And like I said, a lot of shadow work. You know, shadow work is one of those things where you really reflect on who you are and you dive into those things that you like about yourself and also some of the things that maybe you don't like about yourself in order to clarify exactly what it's going to take to make you feel fulfilled. And then you go on a journey to seek it. So I think that it just requires an acknowledgement of who you are. I think it requires the courage to decide that you're going to dive into those things and then to chase your dreams no matter what. And those are the things that have led me to this point. I think that lots of times people think that, like I said, everything has to be lined up, everything has to be clear. And like I said, I'm at the age where what people think matters less. I used to think that I had to force things, I had to force outcomes, I had to force, you know, timelines, I had to force all these things. And as I've gotten older and I guess arguably wiser from the experiences and frankly the mistakes, I've learned stillness. And I think that is key as well. Learn stillness and understand that what is meant for you won't miss you. Yeah. And things that aren't meant for you, you know, will pass you by, and that's okay. And it's okay if it seems like your path isn't straight. I think that those detours are sometimes where the real path lies. And so I think it's just been a mindset. And like I said, just understanding what it is that matters to me and not being afraid to chase it. And obviously, I don't want to make it seem like it's something like I'm self-made. I never say I'm self-made. I mean, there's been a lot of support through the years from my parents, from my community, people who have cheered me on, even when I was at my lowest, my family, my husband, my children. And so I think it's important to have a support system, but I think it's even more important to be real and honest with yourself and understand that when you are living with clarity and you have a divine mission, then no matter what your path looks like, if you're committed to that mission, then you'll achieve it.
Yeah. I'm glad that you said that it's not a straight path, because I think when people see someone like you, someone who is very successful, that they are tempted to think, well, she's got it all together and she's always had it all together. And so that's why she was able to do this. Right. But I couldn't possibly do that. Would you be willing to share one of the biggest challenges that you faced in starting the practice? Just, it's just something that would kind of tell people that you're just like everybody else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the biggest challenges I faced when starting the practice, I think it was my attempt to do everything right, because remember, I was leaving one practice and I was starting my other one, right? And so I wanted to go by the book and I wanted to do everything right. And I wanted to acknowledge the fact that I would be leaving and give the proper notice and say, hey, I really appreciate the opportunity and, thank you for everything that you've done and all that, right? And so I did that. And I think I was several months from being able to open my own practice. But, I wanted to give, like I said, I want to do things properly. I don't like burning bridges, right? And that's just who I am. But so I did that. And it seemed like that went over well, no problems. And so I think this was like 90 days notice is what my contract said. So I gave my 90 days notice. And this was probably on a Friday, let's say. Okay. And so Monday, I get a letter in the mail and it says, your contract is terminated immediately, effective immediately.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so when that happened, of course, I could have said, oh my God, like, what am I going to do? I'm not, my practice isn't ready to open. I don't have any income. What are we going to do? And panicked. But once again, because I believe that this was my mission, then I just took a moment, took a deep breath, and then came up with a plan, right? And so, like I said, things like that and roadblocks that are sort of thrown up in your way could easily derail you if you don't believe that what you're doing is really your mission, right?
Right.
And so what I did was I said, well, maybe I'll do some moonlighting. I'll do that. And at the time, my children were very young. I mean, this is almost 10 years ago. My oldest is 17, my youngest is 14. So my children were very young. We hadn't been here, in this city for very, very long. And it was a scary time because, like I said, I had a mortgage and my kids were in school that I had to pay for. We had all these things because we had built this life based on this salary that I was achieving. And I just said, you know what? I'm not going to let it stop me. So, like I said, I started moonlighting in Idaho, of all places.
Oh my goodness!
And so, and it was winter, and it was all the things. But I might have been gone, a week or 2 weeks at a time. But it was what was necessary in the moment to fulfill my dream. And so I think that that's just an example of sometimes you don't have all the answers. Sometimes you don't have control of what's going to happen. And like you were saying before, people think that the path is straight, and it's never been straight for me. There have been lots of zigs and zags. People see the outcome. They say it's sort of the end of the story, so to speak, but they don't see all the things that you've had to navigate and gone through, and the tears and the and the fears and things like that along the way, and they're significant. But one of the things that I always say, and one of the things that I always relay to my kids, and also any people that I mentor, is you have to start at the end. You have to start with what it is you hope to accomplish. Where am I going? I mean, you and I know, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, right? But if you know what that end point is, even if your path isn't straight, but you keep your focus on that end point, you'll still get there, And one of the beautiful things about your path not being straight is all of the insight and the experience that you gain along the way. And I think that sort of looking back in hindsight, all the things that I've been through, all the difficulties, have what led me to this moment where I'm comfortable in my skin. I always like to say it's just because I'm older. It's just like, you get older, you're like, oh, I'm at the point
Whatever, right?
But it's more than that. It's the experience that you garner along the way when you're going through those trials and you're learning to navigate them, and you have people depending on you, your family and your coworkers and all these things. And that is really what shapes you. And it also allows you the opportunity to figure out what you're made of and what matters to you. Right. And who you are. And so when I talk about all those things, especially when I talk about shadow work and exploring things, it's all those experiences that caused me to take a step back and say, well, why do I feel this way? Why did I react this way? Who am I? What is it really going to take to make me feel fulfilled? And those are the things that not only led me to start my own practice, but helped me to understand that I'm a builder. That's what brings me joy. I see a problem, and my instinct is to solve that problem, especially when it comes to problems that affect people or demographics that matter to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like even with Project Further, and I know we'll talk about that a little bit more, it's one thing to have to navigate the world and navigate through spaces that were never created for me as a woman physician, right? Because, you just kind of put your head down, your nose to the ground, and you have to figure it out because you have people depending on you. But to have daughters who then you have to watch navigate those spaces that were never really created for them, that is what really lit a fire for me, especially with creation of Project Further, because I realized I couldn't just be a cheerleader on the sideline. I had to build something for them in much the same way that I built something for myself when it comes to my practice.
Right. So what I hear you saying, in general, is trust the process.
Absolutely.
Like trust the process. And, I'm a person of faith. It also makes me think about remembering that everything is always working for my good.
Absolutely.
So that even when the challenges come that, they might be coming to grow you or to, protect you from something you never know, what was coming down the road. But that you need to trust the process, and that you need to be mission driven, that you need to have a bigger goal in mind. It's not just about a job. It's about your calling.
Absolutely.
So I really appreciate you.
Absolutely. And about personal fulfillment. I think definitely, especially in the medical space, it's so taxing and so demanding. I mean, from medical school to, residency, fellowship, whatever, and then the job itself. It can it can be all encompassing. It can consume you if you let it. Right. And so I think it's important for us, especially as women, because we carry so much for everyone all the time, to make ourselves a priority, and say, listen, I know that, and you can love the work. I have a career and I love my career. I don't know what I would do if I wasn't doing medicine, if I wasn't doing pediatric GI. So I'm not to say that I don't, not saying that I don't love it. I do love it. I love everything about it. But understanding that there's more to life than that. And like I said, living your divine mission, finding clarity and being unapologetic about it. And that's really the sort of the chasm that I had to bridge. Like I said, as a huge empath, sometimes, to my own detriment, if I see a person or if I see a group that struggles, then immediately my heart goes out to them. And then I start working to try to figure out a way to help. But also, like I said, turning inward and saying, okay, well, what is it going to take for me to feel fulfilled, for me to feel like I'm living my mission? What does that look like? And then, like I said, deciding unapologetically to go after it. I think that's really key. I think as women, sometimes I think we apologize too much. I mean, if you think it's almost like we're pre-wired. I mean, if you have to, scoot past somebody in an aisle in the store, it's like the first thing you say is, "Oh, I'm sorry, can I move past you?" If you need to borrow a salt shaker, "Oh, I'm sorry, can I borrow this?" It's like, stop saying you're sorry. Stop saying, and understand that you can take up space.
Right.
But I think that to go one step further, don't just take up space, build. Right? If you're there, occupy the space that you need, but then make it count. Build something that matters to you, but also that can affect change in an environment or scenario or with the group that matters to you. And I think that's really the driving force. And I want to really encourage anyone who's watching to just get out there. I mean, like I said, it'll be messy. It's not going to be pretty, but it'll work out as long as you know who you are and what drives you, and you just stay true to what it is that you want.
Yeah, so I want to pivot a little bit. I could stay here all day, to be honest, because I'm thinking of like five more questions that I would love to ask about, about your journey and
Mhm.
about the medical side. But I
Mhm.
do want to pivot to Project Further. So
Okay.
you alluded to it. I mentioned it just a little bit in your bio, but can you tell us what Project Further is
Mhm.
and how you came to birth it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Project Further is a platform that is built and that we're building to support girls and young women in youth soccer from small or under-resourced markets who really have a desire to play soccer at the highest levels. And I can say that my daughters were the inspiration for Project Further, but it's really bigger than my family. What we realized is that here where we live in South Mississippi, my youngest daughter, my 14-year-old, you've met London, right?
Yes.
She really fell in love with the sport. And like I said, we've always encouraged our children to be adventurous and to go after what they want. And like I said, she fell in love with the sport. We found out, or we realized after a while, that she was actually very talented at it. And when we started looking around for resources to support her in her journey and her desires, they just weren't available. They either weren't available or we had a lack of advocacy when it came to trying to create those in our community. So essentially what we had to do is we had to go outside of our community. And initially my husband had to take her 2 hours each way to practice 3 times a week. And this was 3 years ago. So she was probably 10, 11 years old. And when you're doing something like that, right, when you're coloring outside the lines, I mean, there'll be a lot of naysayers. I mean, there was no shortage of people to say, oh, that's crazy. Oh, that sounds like a great way to make an 11-year-old hate soccer to me, all these things.
Right.
But, we knew that it was child driven. We knew that it was something that she wanted to do because we had those conversations. And then we just did it. We
So wait
did
a
it.
minute though. How did you even find these? How, tell me a little bit more about the process. So, you recognize that she has this talent
Mhm.
and you want her to play at a higher level, I'm assuming.
Mhm.
And
Right.
so how do you then how do you find these programs? How do you vet them and know that it's worth your time and your money and all of that to
Right.
travel
Yeah.
2 hours?
Oh no. So lots of questions, asking people that I do trust who are in the soccer arena. I mean, that was the initial step. It's just being humble enough to say, listen, this is something I know nothing about. And that's the first step. Is just saying, listen, I need help. I need help. I don't know what I'm doing. I need some guidance. Help me. Right. And so that was the first thing. Asking for help, asking for guidance, and also doing my own research. But honestly, lots of trial and error, lots of mistakes. And that's also what led us to create Project Further, because, like I said, it's built to support people who
Mhm.
have a similar path or a similar desire, and hopefully allow them to bypass some of the mistakes and the wasted time
Sure.
and effort and money that we had, right? And so that is what led us to. We knew that it was a higher league, that was it was new. It was in, like I said, Baton Rouge, 2 hours from here, so it was new. So honestly, we stepped out there on faith a little bit because we didn't know what it would look like. We didn't know how it would end. We didn't know whether she would get there and fizzle and it was all for no. We didn't know, but we decided to step out there and give her a chance to be her best, to
Mhm.
see what she could accomplish, whatever that looked like. Like I said, child driven. I always tell my kids, I can't want something more than you, right? This has to be your goal, and my job is to support you in it. So that's what we did. And so as we were there, we realized it was beneficial, and then we just had to figure out how to make it work. And like I said, it wasn't easy. I mean, traveling 2 hours, each way 3 times a week. There was a lot of dinners in the car, a lot of homework in the car. But, once my daughter showed us that she was serious about it and she was in it and her grades remained great and she was motivated and she loved it, then we said, well, you're the one doing the work, so we'll figure out the rest. So that's kind of what led us there. Now, since then, there's a lot that has developed, and
Mhm.
most of it was not planned. Like, we were learning as we went. We're like, okay, well, this is a high league, high level of play. What does good look like? Okay, well, we're playing teams from other places that are better than our team, but we're still learning and she's still growing. So that's important. And then she got to a point where she sort of plateaued out where she was. And so then my husband and I, we started looking for other options and other opportunities. Once again, talking to people, random people, reaching out to people that we had never met on the internet, being connected with people through friends of ours, having those conversations, and then creating a plan And so that ultimately led us to a soccer school in Dallas, which is where she lives now. So her and my husband relocated to Dallas because Dallas is a big market for soccer and arguably one of the best markets in the country. So she went there, she started a soccer school, which she loves, okay, joined a team there, but definitely a lot of growing pains there because she was an outsider, she was from a different league, but she really embraced that journey. She embraced it. She embraced the difficulty of it. She embraced the growth. And we were looking for other opportunities in the area. And then there was a different opportunity that came knocking. Okay. And so, like I always say, the path doesn't have to be clear. You don't have to know everything that's going to happen. You just have to be open to the journey, right? Open to the journey. Be intentional about it. Be adventurous. And understand that what's for you will find you as long as you stay true to your goal and your journey. And that's what's happened. And so long story short, she now plays for a team out of LA, actually. So she lives in Dallas and she flies to LA 2 or 3 times a week to train and to play. But this is one of the top teams in the country. So, you know, and it's funny because the first questions that people ask is like, well, how are you going to do that? Like, are they going to move to LA? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't have any idea.
You don't have the answers.
I don't have any answers. But this is the thing. When things like that happen completely out of the blue, which are so extraordinary, my approach is I don't want to get bogged down in minutia and logistics, right? Mm-hmm. This was a miracle, right? This was
what do they say? Everything is figure outable, right?
Right. Well, it's almost divine intervention. So clearly something will work itself out. I'm going to do my part and I'm going to do the research and we'll figure things out. But I don't want to miss the moment by focusing strictly on logistics. I don't have to have everything figured out. I know that this is an opportunity that's a once in a lifetime thing. And so we're going to do it and we'll figure out sort of everything else as we go along. And I think that's okay. And that's really a big deal for me. Because, you know how it is with medicine. It's like everything is very, very regimented. It's like you do this and you expect this outcome. These are the parameters of what's normal. Anything outside of that is not normal. And so to get to a place in my life to where I'm okay with the unknown and I'm okay trusting the journey, it is a big deal. But definitely, like I said, it's taken a lot of work to get here. But I wouldn't change a thing about it. I mean, I think that it's left me probably as happy as I've ever been in my life, at this stage of my life, and as fulfilled as I've ever been, and as open to whatever is next. And I think that is what has allowed me to throw myself so fully into Project Further, in the belief that I hold that it serves a higher purpose. With Project Further, I mean, we're not trying to create stars. We're just trying to clear the fog so they can shine. Right.
So what are some of the resources that you offer? That's the first question. Mm-hmm. And the second question is, how do people find you, or how do you find them?
Mm-hmm. Right. So Project Further, we started Project Further about a year ago, and there have been some refinements along the way, and we're still growing as far as our community. So the first thing that we focus on is community. We're trying to build a community of people who find value in what it is that we're giving. So we started out as a podcast. And so it was just about the journey, just relaying information, because like I said, I think some of the barriers sometimes are that people are a little bit intimidated in terms of asking, they don't want to come to you and kind of ask questions and make themselves vulnerable in that way. So we wanted to create a platform so we could just put the information out there for anyone to digest as they needed to. And since then, what we've done is we've pivoted to services. I've recently brought on a partner who's a young man that I've known for years and years, who is a coach who played as a young man, who played professionally, who played in college, who's coached at the college level, junior college, and also D1 college. So he's actually come on board. And so when it comes to services, we're providing, we're about to start providing coaching and also creating individual pathways for girls who want to play at the higher level, whether that is college, whether that is professionally. Those are things that we're looking to craft individually for the player based on their skill set, based on their needs, and based on their desires. So that is also a service that we're looking at. Video creation even is something, you know, a small thing that is important when it comes to the recruitment process that we're also doing now. You know, if you have game footage, you know, we review that. You know, my coach Walker is his name, reviews that, and then we get it edited with our professional editor so that you can have that ready to submit for recruiting purposes. Media training and interview training for the girls. So all those things are things that we are putting into place or have put into place, and we hope to continue to grow that with everything from, you know, nutrition to showcases. So, I mean, we feel like this is really limitless in terms of what it can become, but it has to be based on and focused on the needs of girls who are in the space, who are having difficulty navigating it because of a lack of resources or pathway or knowledge, frankly. And so those are some of the things that we're doing, which are tremendously exciting.
So then how are they finding you? So, you know, like say I'm here in Maryland and I have a kid who's interested in playing soccer at a higher level. How do I connect with somebody like you who has this experience?
There are a couple of different ways. One way is just to message me. You know, I get messages on social media all the time. You know, we post, you know, a variety of things from, you know, tips to insights. We're actually about to start a nutrition series on social media about sports nutrition, which I'm really, really excited about. We're about to launch our first webinar, which is going to talk all about the recruiting process, college recruiting for rising sophomores and juniors, because as of June 15th, the D1 schools can actually talk to girls who are going into their junior year. Okay, so lots of parents have lots of questions about that. You know, what does that look like? What should I be doing right now? Should I be contacting coaches or not? And obviously with having Coach Walker now part of our platform, he has all of that intricate experience. And so we're really, really excited about the webinar, and there'll be more to come as time goes on. We have like probably about 10 different ones that are planned that will be released over the course of the year. So like I said, people can message me on different social media platforms. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. But also, if you go to our website, which is www.projectfurther.com, there is a way to contact us there as well. Okay, whether you have a question about services, whether you have a question about our pathway, I mean, you know, you can ask us anything. We're here to help. So we're excited to do that.
So why Project Further? Where did the name come from?
Yeah. So Project Further, it's a play on the HER on further, right? So it's Project Further.
Okay.
Yeah, right. And so we really just loved it. I mean, we wanted to incorporate the her in there because it really is focusing on, at this point, girls and young women in soccer. And you know, nothing against my guys. I mean, you know, we actually have, you know, lots of boys who actually follow the page and parents who will contact us about their sons. But it's just that girls are what I have experience with. I'm not a boy dad.
Yeah.
So that's where it came from, Project Further, because like I said, that initial thought was just allowing girls to go further in the sport. But also, you can say it, project further, right? We want our girls to be able to project further. So it works both ways. And so that was kind of the idea.
That's a pretty good play on words.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Now, were you an athlete yourself?
You know, I played a little bit of softball coming up in high school, you know, in middle school. But, you know, I grew up in Mississippi, in the country. So whatever the boys were doing, I was doing, you know. So I was heavily involved in sports, you know, baseball and basketball and even football growing up, because that's what you did, you know. So yeah, I mean, I think that I'm athletically inclined. I'm a sports lover for sure. And I think that's because, once again, I grew up playing with the boys. That's all that was around. I have 2 younger brothers. So if I was playing, I was doing whatever they were doing, right? And so a sports lover for sure. I didn't begin to love soccer until my girls started playing. Really didn't know anything about it, but fell in love with it hard and fast. And it's really our sport. You know, it's so fun. The sport is growing so much when it comes to women. And it's really encouraging to see all the things that are happening within that realm for women and just women's sports in general, but especially with soccer, you know, the fact that they've been so, you know, so open and so vocal about equity in terms of resources, in terms of pay and all those things. I mean, real trailblazers in that sport. And so I'm just proud that my daughter is interested in being a part of that journey, whatever that journey looks like. You know, I tell parents all the time, you know, and I'm not a professional at this, you know, but like I said, there's some things that I learned from building my practice that can definitely be superimposed on what we're doing here. But just, I think being an eternal student is also something that's important. Being open to learn and open to admit when maybe that wasn't the best move, and being willing to pivot, and just not give up. Just not give up on what it is that you're passionate about. And so that's where we are with Project Further. And like I said, we're looking at continuing to add resources. Another good friend of mine I've recently been in discussions with, who is interested in becoming our marketing and PR person. And these are things, that have just sort of organically started to happen. And I think, once again, it's about allowing yourself to receive that energy. It's just being open to it and being resilient in terms of what you want. And like I said, unapologetic, just that has made all the difference. Understand that, we don't know how far this goes. We don't know what the end looks like, but just the journey, I think, is a big part of the reward. So.
Right. And I just admire your willingness to share, because I think, there are a lot of people who would, navigate this journey. They'd find out a few things, and they, maybe would share it in their immediate circle, but wouldn't, create a whole platform for other girls and that they don't know, in places they've never been. So I applaud you for taking on that mission, because it is really important that our girls have advocates, in all kinds of spaces.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. But yeah, like I said, it's, and I think that it's, it's a labor of love for me, but it's also a learning journey for me. As much as I give to Project Further, it gives back to me, because it does allow me to stretch and grow in ways that I wasn't used to. Media is something that is completely different to me, but I've fallen in love with that as well. The ability to connect with people that I've never seen, that I don't know, the ability to scale and grow and reach people that otherwise I might never come in contact with. It has been really enlightening and very rewarding and exciting, honestly. And it excites me in a way that is different from the way that medicine excites me. And at this stage of life, I start thinking about legacy. When you're initially out of medical school, and like I said, I had a young family, and I just had to make it work, right? It's like I got mouths to feed, I got a mortgage, I got to make it work, right? But then as you get a little bit older and you live a little bit and you learn to know yourself a little bit, and you figure out really what drives you and what lights you on fire, you start thinking more about legacy. Like, what is it that I'm going to leave behind when I'm not here? How am I going to affect change? How am I going to, touch people that may or may not ever come in contact with me personally? And so I think that's really been the pivot for me in terms of, Project Further and what we're hoping to do, and why when I work on it so tirelessly and honestly so selflessly, just to grow it. Because like I said, my daughter, with what she's doing right now, I mean, she's in a great position to live her dreams. And I've had people who ask me, okay, well, then why are you still doing this? And I tell them all the time, I mean, Project Further was never just about my family. It was never just about my daughter. I mean, that was the inspiration.
Right.
But then I realized, I mean, and the thing is, living in a rural state in Mississippi, South Mississippi, where we live, it's easy to think, well, this is a Mississippi problem. This is a Southern problem, but I mean, my daughter plays for a team in Florida, right outside of Orlando. And there are friends that I've met there who have contacted me who have a similar issue. Like, what am I going to do with my daughter? Where is she going to play next season? What should I be considering? Where should we be going? And that's right outside of Orlando. I met people in, she's trained in Virginia. Same thing. You meet parents who have all these questions and they're trying to figure out their next best way forward. Utah. I mean, there are places all over this country that are just like here. And places who have all the sports team and all the teams and all the resources don't understand that. Like, there was no pathway here, none.
Right.
And so the only option was either to build something or to let her dream die before it even really got started, which, like I said, is just not, that's just not how I'm built. And that's not an option for me. And it's not how I'm trying to raise my daughters. Like I said, we want to be adventurous. We want to go out.
Well, you are definitely creating a legacy, and you're a very strong role model, seriously, because, it wasn't that you think about it. How many people didn't get to live their dream because there was no path where they were?
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, and that's in any area.
Any area, any aspect, any aspect in your realm,
Right.
It really is. And I think there's a little bit of tragedy in that, it really is.
Sure.
I mean, to grow up and say, well, what if? And like I said, we don't know ultimately how this is going to end for my daughter. But I think that's less important than the life lessons that you learn.
Right.
I mean, my family and I talk about it all the time. It's like, when you look at greatness, this is what it looks like. It's hard, right? But we can do hard things. It's
Right.
okay. We can do hard things. You don't have to shrink from, from the challenge of it. Just step out there on faith, and do your best to make the best decisions you can in the moment. And I think that if you are living in clarity and alignment, then the rest will become clear. Also, I think that, we kind of talked about it previously, just surrounding yourself with people who bolster you and support you and provide you with what you need. I think so many times, especially as women, we don't ask for what we need,
No.
because we're so programmed to just carry it all. We can't let anything fall. We can't let anybody down, but sometimes we just need to look inward and say, you know what, I don't want to let myself down, so I'm going to ask for what I need unequivocally.
But I think sometimes we don't even ask ourselves what we need.
Right. Because we don't take the time to really listen to ourselves. And like I said, we don't take the time to really know ourselves. And I think there's a little bit of tragedy with that too,
Oh,
because
for sure.
if you live your entire life
sure.
serving others and you never really get to know yourself and you never find true fulfillment and joy, then what's it all for? Right. And so I'm grateful and I'm blessed to be in a space where I can be myself, I can know myself, I can know what makes me happy, and I can ask for what I need. I mean, that's a gift. And also, like I said, I met some incredible people who provide me with things. Like I was saying, my friend of mine who has introduced me to journaling and meditation, which isn't even negotiable at this point. Journaling for me isn't just about venting. It's where I meet myself.
Right. Oh, yeah. It brings about so much clarity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. People who, can introduce you to things or resources that maybe you never thought. I love to read, and so one of my favorite books that I'm reading right now is Let Them by Mel Robbins. I don't know.
I haven't started that one yet.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And so just briefly, sort of the theory is, it's called the Let Them theory, and it's so applicable, I think, to anyone, but especially women who are trying to be everything to everyone, but also maybe carve out a place in this world for themselves, so the theory is let them, if you are in a space where you feel like you're not appreciated or you're not welcomed or you're not seen, or, you do all the work, you do all the things that you need to do to get things accomplished or to be acknowledged in your job or whatever, but you still don't get that promotion. You still don't get that acknowledgement. You don't, it's understanding that sometimes you just don't have control over that. And so if people think a certain thing about you, if they disregard you, then let them, right? Because you can't force things, right? But the second part of that I think sometimes get lost in the text is, you let them, but then let me, let me decide my next best move. Let me decide what I'm going to do about it, right? If I am in a job and I've done the things that I need to get that promotion and I know I deserve it, but my boss will never give it to me, then let him or her not give it to me. But now let me choose what I'm going to do about it, right?
And that allows you to come from a place of power. And I think that's what a lot of this really is about. It's about reclaiming, or recognizing first that you have power. Absolutely. And then using it to build whatever it is that you want. I think that's how people get unstuck, to recognize, because, again, you think you can't do anything, you can't do this, you can't, you have to stay in this job, or, there's no way for my kid to play soccer at a different level, but you recognize that you have power to affect change.
Absolutely.
And I think that is so liberating.
And it just starts with one tiny step, for people out there who are watching or listening, if they have an idea, if they have a business that they want to start, just do one small thing on it. It can be overwhelming when you're like, I don't know what to do. Do one thing, claim that domain, do something, make that one step, and then the rest becomes clear and it becomes easier as you go. So I think that's really important.
Yes. Well, thank you, April, for joining me tonight. I've really enjoyed this conversation. You've been all on my street. So I love it. I absolutely love it. So tell us again, if people are interested in the practice or people are interested in Project Further, tell us how they can find you, how they can work with you. what, if anything, can we do to support Project Further?
Yeah. Just share it with everybody that you know. Okay. Just share it with everybody that you know, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to build community first and foremost, right? Because I think that there are things that everyone can bring to the table. There's insight, there are resources, people who don't even really know that they have things to offer. Like your journey, your voice is important. We want to know what it is that people need from us. What resources are you lacking? How can we make it better? What questions do you have about the journey or your next best move? And like I said, there are also some formalized things in addition to just conversations, formalized things that we're going to be offering as far as support of the pathway, the webinars that we're going to be doing, all those things. So that's the biggest thing. It's just, like the page, follow us on social media, share with everyone that you know, and just help us spread the word, and definitely just give us feedback. We are, this is a nimble process for us. This is all grassroots. Okay.
Yes,
So we're trying to build something that matters to people, but the only way to build something that matters to people is we have to know what matters.
Yes.
And so
Yes,
that is
for
really
sure.
most critical. And just stay tuned. Just stay tuned. We have so many exciting things in the works. I can't wait to share them all. I can't wait to build with the community, because that's really what it's about. And I can't wait to see all the change that we're going to affect, not just in our community for these girls who just have a desire to be their best, but ideally all over the country. I'm just so excited for the journey.
Yeah, and I'm excited to witness the evolution.
Oh, well, thank
So,
you.
so thank you so much. You guys make sure
Mhm.
that you follow April, follow Project Further, share this episode, especially you sports moms. Share the episode with your friends, and we will see you back here next week. Once again, don't forget, registration is still open for Weekend for Me, Grand Cayman, October 2nd through the 5th. Please, please, please share with your friends, and we will see you next week. Take care. Thanks
All
again,
right.
Dr. April.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.